Hi everyone, an amazing evening tonight with two amazing persons that I want to introduce you, because tonight we are going to talk about a subject that has been given to me in my last book, We Will Never Let You Down. I speak about ship propulsion, spaceship, alien spaceships propulsion, especially flying saucers. And Thorhan, my contact from the Galaxy Federation, explained to me briefly some data about ships propulsion and navigation. So first, I'm going to introduce the two amazing men I have here. So Chris Essonne with wonderful Tesla behind.
So good evening, Elena, good evening, Dan, and good evening, everyone.
So Chris Essonne, you are French, and over the past 10 years, as an engineer working in the robotics industry, you developed a passion for unexplained phenomena refuted by official science, and more specifically for the UFO phenomenon. With a scientific background, gold medal in physics for West of France at a contest in the 80s, you are committed to finding out where official science has gone wrong and what alternative approach can be proposed. The results of your researches are published on your YouTube and Odyssey channels and on the scientific website gsjournal.net. You find all the links below. So that's for you, Chris. And and Dan Winter. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
So Dan, you are an electrical engineer, system analyst at IBM. You have 30 years teaching physics of consciousness, sacred geometry, and biofeedback. So you can find more about that in the description box. And you've published also about fractal physics, cause of gravity, and propulsion as well. All interesting topics. So tonight, I wanted to talk about the intel I received and pick your thoughts about this. So before I shut up. Thorhan told me about three main systems to consider in a ship functioning alien ship: the core power, the propulsion technology, and the navigation. So you have the core power, he told me, can be, that's the generator of with the universal force, what he called frill, etheric energy core, which is a personal energy powering, and antimatter. And then the propulsion that can have a different method, different techniques: anti-gravity torsion field, dark energy, or hyperdrive or warp. And then the navigation that can be done by thought or manual drive. So now I'm going to leave it to you. What can you first tell me about the core engine of a ship? How you think it can work? How a spaceship, a flying saucer especially, can be powered. So Chris, what would be your idea on it, please?
Yes, so the basics of this physics is the energy of the vacuum that is was called ether a long time ago, or in the 19th century, and in your book with Thorhan, that is called frill. And all these we cannot understand physics and how UFO works if we do not start by understanding the presence of this energy that fills vacuum. So all the physics, modern science since Einstein is completely wrong. In fact, or uses the wrong hypothesis, but arrives. It's very surprising, but arrives at the good results. So there is a general relativity that Einstein has proposed, gives the good result, but the physics, the physical hypotheses are opposite to reality. And so our modern science since 1905 believes that space is empty and vacuum, intergalactic vacuum is empty, but this is completely wrong. And it is all what I've discovered, but thanks, in fact, to the study of Tesla works. In fact, Tesla had discovered that energy, so ether. So Tesla had the proof that ether is present and fills space. So it was one of the biggest opponent to Einstein theory. And so our views today, since 1905, are completely wrong. So science and even so both cosmology is based on wrong hypothesis, and also particle physics, even quantum mechanics, at the beginning was also keeping the same hypothesis than Einstein. So with a vacuum that is empty, and so then they have to reintroduce zero-point energy, dark energy, because they see that something doesn't work, and so the physics today is full of incoherence. So really, we have to understand or to rethink completely physics. So it is what is explained on my videos, on my channel, and so what I will explain tonight, that all physics can be re-explained, but very simply. It's much more simple than general relativity, quantum physics, if we start with the correct hypothesis. And so, this energy is present everywhere with a very, very high density. So there is no difficulty for a UFO to understand, or a civilization that knows that this energy is there to use it. Dan,
well,
do you have
fascinating.
anything to add?
Yeah. Please, Dan, what you have to say about that?
I like Chris's approach, actually, and his publications, I think, are useful in this regard. And I think we can take some next steps here. First, Chris is emphasizing the vacuum, it behaves like a fluid, and that's useful. The way we would describe that fluid or ether actually is the compression and rarefaction of charge, plus and minus charge, which behaves as a superfluid, which is pervasive in the vacuum. So we agree on that. And Chris also describes the presence of gravity as a difference of pressure in that vacuum, that fluid, which is very useful. We can go much further, I think, and that's where I would like to move this evening, which is to say, many physicists already agree that the cause of gravity is fractality. It's actually very fashionable these days. And with regard to Elena's question here, saying, where did they get the energy from the vacuum? I've spent my life on this, actually. I was the lecturer at the Breakthrough Energy Movement in Amsterdam recently on the source of energy from the vacuum energy tech, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. Point being, the way in which implosion of charge sucks energy from the vacuum is also simultaneously the way in which propulsion or gravity is generated, because of the way fractality causes gravity. To visualize that is quite simple. If you visualize a rose electrically, then you have the image, because physics has mathematics has long known that fractality was the key to infinite compression. That's well known and accepted. What is not known and accepted is what is a fractal electric field. visualizer rose. Because once you know the source of infinite compression, or perfect non-destructive compression, that was actually Einstein's name for gravity and the solution of the unified field, which is basically how you implode capacitive charge, or that stuff of which the vacuum is made. And if I may say further, that is going to lead us directly to a far more specific description of what you, Elena, referred to as the Vril, and the Germans referred to as the Vril energy, which we believe is what squirts out the center of that pine cone of fractality, at the center where the compression is completed using what's something called golden mean ratio, which is fractality perfected. That transverse up and down electromagnetic wave is compressed to the point of being compressional, or correct term is longitudinal EMF, incorrectly called scalar or torsional. And that longitudinal electromagnetic field coherence is specifically what's called Vril, and is specifically what famously Tom Bearden has proven is the stuff of gravity waves. So where we want to go with this, where I would suggest humbly that we go with this evening, is we take this picture, which is actually, this is called the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. And it's the picture of the only possible perfect three-dimensional fractal, which we've been marketing for years. Point is that I recently wrote a new equation to prove this is the structure of hydrogen. Specifically, if you take my new book, it's called Origin of Biologic Negentropy. The origin of biologic negentropy, it's all at fractalfield.com, is this new equation. It's called Planck, length and time, which is the musical key signature of the universe. And then you simply keep multiplying that by powers or exponents of golden ratio. And you get all the important variables, including Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional, and the two frequencies of photosynthesis, and 3 radii of hydrogen. And you see this structure, it's a pent-dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, ecosa, the only possible three-dimensional fractal. And that structure is precisely what powers of golden ratio produce, which produces, if you take this pent shape here and traverse your attention to the white pent vertex here, the white pent vertex here, you get this 60-degree implosion cone, which is actually the centerpiece of our theimploder.com implosion tech, which is a successful commercial tech around the world for imploding water. Point being that when Schauberger built the vortex this way, he made electricity from gravity, and he made gravity. And this new physics of understanding how that propulsion worked, using that fractal implosion of that superfluid, actually, is precisely how Vimana, Nazi Bell, Hondabu worked, what was called impulse power on Star Trek. And so the reason gravity is produced traversing down that cone is what I would like to explain in great detail, using the superfluid model, which both Chris and Nassim use, for how charge implodes. So that's going to be, so, and when we're done, we can explain exactly what warp power versus what impulse power is on Star Trek. And further than what the point is that we'd like to use that, not to be overly ambitious here, but you see, I would like to use that to explain one more thing. The perfection of that vortex, which in the case of Hondabu, Nazi Bell, Vimana, was a mercury vortex doped with soluble iron powder made soluble by a wetting agent, which added inertia. But that vortex, you see, which then it's imploding, and the implosion of that vortex is causing acceleration of charge from compression of charge because of golden ratio interference, heterodyning, implosion, and that it's adding and multiplying recursively, fractally, not just the wavelengths, but the phase velocities. And when golden ratio compression, fractal compression, adds and multiplies phase velocities in only that geometry, the phase velocities adding and multiplying recursively turn compression of charge into acceleration of charge towards center, which Chris has agreed. Acceleration is in fact the mechanism, in fact the definition of gravity. Gravity is indistinguishable from acceleration. So the phase velocities, the speed of the wave fronts, adding and multiplying recursively, produces a compression into an acceleration, and that acceleration of charge out through center into a longitudinal wavelength is named the gravity. And the second smoking gun, other than the fact that golden ratio is how hydrogen built, is when famously Professor Raymond Chow measured velocities faster than light, which is how longitudinal waves propagate. And those measurements centered around golden ratio times the speed of light. So we have two smoking guns proving golden ratio fractality is the cause of gravity. And we can describe in detail then how that made Haunebu and Nazi Bell and the difference between warp and impulse. The final point I'm going to make, and I've talked too long already, and obviously need some questions, but the final point is, if we then understand why anything is centripetal, and physics doesn't, sadly, then we can know why an object falls to the ground, and physics doesn't, sadly. We could then, in that same process, discover the cause of consciousness and the power of mind, because now we know that that same plasma vortex that caused gravity when it became fractal implosive is actually the phase conjugate or fractal physics of consciousness. When kids see without their eyes, they say, I'm seeing through a vortex tornado inside their head, flameinmind.com. And that vortex becomes implosive and centripetal, and the vortex makes an eyeball. And the projection of that field, the same as vril, is how you project your aura when you have that kind of bliss that's required for kids seeing without their eyes. And when you have access to that bliss experience, your body propagates that same longitudinal coherence, and which is called the Ba from the Ka, which is exactly what vril energy is, that longitudinal EMF coherence. And we can prove it because we made a plasma field, Therify.net, that triggers lucid dreaming. So that vril energy that you produce, that longitudinal interferometry, which is how gravity is made, and Tom Bearden wrote the equations, is also what you take with you when you die and when you lucid dream, that same coherence. So point being, if we see how fractality creates centripetal forces and gravity, we also learn the secret to consciousness and how his mind, how attention steered that ship.
Before I ask Chris his take on that, and I noticed two things. I have already 4 questions. I'm going to mention 2 things. When Thorhan gave me just quick visions of how it was working in the ship. So this here you have, I don't know if you see well. Okay.
Yeah, I can see it. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there's a torus. Good.
Yes, a torus. So yes, here that's the cut of a saucer. You have the frill reservoir here in the middle, and there's a cone on the top of it. And I had no idea. I said, why a cone? I said, is it a pyramid? He said, no, it's a cone. It's round. It's a cone. Now I got it. What this mysterious cone is. So the frill is in a reservoir here, and there's the cone. That's magnets around it, and magnets around it. I don't know why magnets, and that's the coil. So that's it.
There's an imploding core, as it were. The classic drawings of the Vril Vimana Haunebu craft showed that iron powder doped red mercury liquid it's a container that contained 2 oppositely rotating concentric cylinders, which were causing that mercury liquid to form a donut torus, exactly like the bottom picture there. And then where that converges at center, which is the left-hand bottom picture with that center convergence, is the implosion.
There's another one here. Yeah.
Yes.
There's another one on the other side, of course.
The magnets provide some plasma containment, which is the issue. But so the point is that where it implodes at that center point, both the charge inertia and the magnetic inertia, there's magnetic phase conjugation and capacitive phase conjugation, that implosion of charge both magnetically and electrostatically has accelerated the charge through the speed of light by golden ratio phase conjugation per second. And that acceleration emerges through the speed of light into longitudinal interferometry. The proof of this is that the longitudinal waves travel at golden ratio times the speed of light. And beautifully, as Chris Essonne says in his own paper, that the speed of light is relative in there, and that the experience of acceleration is the cause of gravity. So in effect, the ability of that vortex to start accelerating towards center depends on a very specific fractal geometry. And that literally is implosion of charge. And that is the cause of not just gravity, but consciousness. That's we've been teaching for years.
And amazing. My second thing I noticed, you speak of, I've seen of my own eyes in a ship. I've been shown this cylinder. There's a cylinder in the middle here, containing the frill. And you speak of superfluid. I saw this. It was contained in it. It was like liquid light, and it was, like a lava lamp, but not really like.
I think
marble.
A good word would be plasma, probably. It's plasma implosion. It's a plasma field, and the plasma field becomes centripetal when it's fractal or conjugating, which is what makes it implosive or held together. For example, our Therify.net. Cold plasma can become centripetal in a field if you use golden ratio. Again, just to say, in our publications at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, you can see the first paper we published proved that golden ratio is the generalized solution to fractality and the generalized wave mechanic proven solution to constructive wave interference. Therefore, golden mean ratio by wave equation is the proven solution not just to compression, but to implosion. So once you know that you found the solution to wave compression, even Einstein knew that infinite non-destructive compression was the solution to gravity, but he never learned what a fractal was. So the first paper we published proved golden ratio is the generalized wave mechanics solution to non-destructive compression. Therefore, if you know the solution to compression, you know the cause of gravity, because that's how the compression, the adding and multiplying recursively, which is the problem golden ratio solves, adds and multiplies not just the wavelength, but the phase velocities. And when the phase velocities, the wave front speed, add and multiply recursively constructively only in golden ratio, that adding and multiplying constructively of the phase velocity speeds is the acceleration of charge towards center. Suddenly, you for the first time understand why charge accelerates towards center, named the gravity, if the angle of that vortex is correct. As Victor Schauberger was stepping aside, is his water vortex imploding, and it made voltage from gravity because it was imploding. It had to be piezoelectric. It was doped with a piezoelectric. The point was capacitive implosion, and then in the mercury vortex, they actually add the iron powders. You have magnetic implosion and capacitive implosion. Anyway, that's more detail than you wanted, but you see now, this is exactly what's called what's called impulse power in Star Trek. And I can explain warp propulsion in great detail if you like.
Let's talk about impulse later. Yes. Chris, what do you have to say about that?
What is interesting is that our works are really complementary, because
I think so. I do think so.
The physics I described is at macroscopic level and uses only the pressure, while Dan explains, in fact, what creates this change of pressure,
exactly.
The physics of vortex. But so I would say I'm more at a macroscopic level, and Dan explains physics at a microscopic level, at the quantum level, and so the two are really complementary, but we are on the same hypothesis.
Yeah. In fact, Chris, as I was reading your paper, I noted 4 areas where we're agreeing with each other. You're calling it a fluid. I call it a superfluid. You call it the origin of acceleration towards center is the key of gravity. And you call it a difference of pressure in the ether, which I agree. I simply call that pressure a compression and rarefaction of charge, which is how we describe the fluid of the ether as plus and minus charge, which is simply compression and rarefaction. And then you noted about how the speed of light changes, which is exactly what I'm saying. It changes by golden ratio times c in the Riemann-Schausen measurement. And then you talked about matter density is actually the curvature of energy density. And when Einstein said you're curving space-time, that's really not the best language. What's curving is the trajectory path of charge. The bubble of charge, and that curvature is caused by the origin of centripetal force. Interestingly, in my book, I go further and say, not only is fractal phase conjugation by golden ratio the cause of all centripetal forces, which is, for example, gravity and mindfulness, but it's also the cause of all negentropy and self-organization. For example, my friend, Professor Bill Tiller, proved conclusively that focused human attention causes electric fields to implode or compress in the book, Conscious Acts of Creation. So now we know why focused human attention causes electric fields to compress, because it's centripetal. And then Uri Geller measured that focused human attention reduces radioactivity measurably. And we know exactly why, because centripetal charge is the opposite of radiation. So the centripetal force of your attention is how you can use your attention as a toroidal plasma field to steer that ship. Interestingly, now not only do we understand the physics of consciousness, we know how those children were seeing without their eyes. It's called non-destructive wave collapse, which actually agrees with Gary Schwartz and Stuart Hameroff, the perfected wave collapse, which is another name for gravity, incidentally. But now we know by the same physics that perfect plasma vortex toroid explains what you take with you when you go out of your body. Near-death experience, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, astral travel, that you're taking that same implosive plasma vortex. Medical surgeons have proven, they've looked at their body from outside their body. We know you can take your vision outside the body. Millions of people insist it's true. Now we know why, because that plasma vortex is your consciousness. And that's why you can steer that ship.
There is no more sound. Elena, you are mute. You're muted.
Oh, Elena. Oh,
Yes.
We lost you. We lost you for a
Okay.
second. Go ahead, Elena.
That's why we record. Okay. I want to mention, after what you said, Dan, it clicked my memory in the different types of core power. Thorhan told me about spaceships. You have. He told me about etheric energy core. He describes it as it's for specific higher density crafts. It uses personal auric field of a being connected to the ship's propulsion system. The craft is navigated by consciousness. Is it what you're talking about?
I mean, I'm an electrical engineer, so I would like to be very specific and not use just vague metaphors. What we're saying is specifically at flameinmind.com, we've proven that golden ratio cascade, alpha to beta in your brain waves, is measurable physics of when you have bliss and when you can see without your eyes, and also then when you can remote view and lucid dream, because we make that field in plasmatherapy.net and replicably trigger lucid dreaming, the best predictor of whether you'll take memory through death. That's longitudinal coherence propagating. That's the Baf and the Ka, the rainbow light body, and the Kesjan body. So the ability to make that coherent field depends on that harmonic cascade. And what that harmonic cascade, in the case of hydrogen, if you braid the hydrogen bond at the center of your DNA ladder rung into longer and longer wavelengths in the recursive implosive braiding of DNA, thread, string, rope, fat rope. That's called perfect embedding, what physics calls entanglement, the mechanism of action at a distance. And entanglement perfected, conventional physics says, is how action at a distance happens through an Einstein-Rosen bridge. But we go much further and describe more specifically, entangled and perfected is the problem phase conjugation by golden ratio solves, sending that coherent longitudinal wave down that vortex tube, and that creates interference at a distance, interferometry at a distance. And so the remote nodes on that fractal array are actually the physics of portals and stargates, very specifically. And this is how mind is steering this. First of all, what I'm saying is that the number of harmonics superposed, which the New Age woo-woos call ascension, is actually the number of axes of charge spin symmetry that can be superimposed in a nest, which is the problem this structure solves. Going to the next dimension, for example, when the cube tilts 32 degrees, rotates, blink 5 times, you have pentodeca. That's the next dimension because it's the next superposed axis of spin, and it's ascension because that's measured when you can measure that next harmonics, for example, in the brainwave. So The reason you call it next dimension density is because you've added harmonics to the superposed axis spin, which show up as harmonic inclusiveness or fractality, the definition of immune health and heart rate variability, for example, harmonic inclusive. And harmonic inclusiveness in your breath and your heart is the physics of compassion. It's physics of compression, therefore empathy. So eventually, again, I'm going a little fast here, and I confess, I'm sorry, but I get enthused. But just to say, this leads us not just how the advanced consciousness, who was said to be in more dimensions, for example, the 9, and I knew Andrea Puharich well when she taught Phyllis Schlemmer about the 9, but the superposed toroidal fields, the 9 are just an example, introduced the concept of action at a distance and Stargate specifically in this way. See if you can follow this just briefly. So
I do.
Here is this longitudinal compressional wave. It's called a longitudinal EMF, incorrectly called scalar or torsional. It's a compression wave like this, like a sound wave, except electromagnetic. All of physics talks about electromagnetics, only the transverse up and down compression. And that's not the perfect squeeze. The perfect squeeze is the longitudinal wave. That's the one that goes faster than light. That's what causes action at a distance. That's the physics of gravity waves. That's how sunlight through a copper wire can grow plants in your black basement, because the longitudinal wave, the ba from the cow, the vril. So once you begin to understand this compression wave then has to bounce and then share inertia with the heat causing transverse or up and down component, it can only do that at the symmetric compression nodes, the fractal field. So visualize this dodecaecosa, which is the proven geometry of not just DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, but the geometry of the nodes of sacred space on the Earth grid, where Bruce Cathy proved radioactivity, critical mass changes at the magnetic lines of the Earth grid, and where Kozyrev proved telepathy is enabled. The only place you can put a cathedral or a labyrinth or even Therify to do action at a distance, because this longitudinal compression node bounces in and out of the inertia of the transverse only when it encounters another compression node. To put it poetically, why Jodie Foster needed a dodecahedron in the movie Contact to do the lucid dream called a Stargate. So actually, the reason it's a Stargate is you create this, it's called hypercubic compression. They use the Feynman-Enochian alphabet to make the movie Stargate. It's another story, but it's shadows. If you take the shadows of this spiral self-organizing on this torus, the mean spiral, and you look at it from the symmetry axes of a tetra, that's called Hebrew and Sanskrit. And your mind is a plasma donut. That's what your mind is in the optical cortex hologram. And the angle of that plasma donut, when you visualize a Hebrew letter and fill your optical cortex, making a golem, for example, you're determining the angle at which the plasma donut of your consciousness is imploding. Literally, you're steering the squirt gun, introducing the metaphor of how mind steered that craft. So you visualize a sequence of Hebrew letters, which is just shadows of which angle of this spiral to control the vector direction of your thruster. Now you know why that spiral is implosive and makes gravity. I just explained it. So the Stargate happens when you take the superset to this Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabet we generated here, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. You can see the animations. But the superset to that is a hypercube symmetry called Feynman-Enochian. It's the angel alphabet, introduction to the 9. And those letters of Feynman-Enochian, hypercube symmetry, the same spiral, is how they made the movie Stargate, because you compress those charge waves into that implosive center where the longitudinal propagation is coherent. Then if there's a receiving point anywhere that has the exact same frequency signature, the longitudinal interferometry will propagate faster than the speed of light down that wormhole, and that is a Stargate.
And I've been told that you need a frequency key, which is composed with they don't call it sacred geometry; they call it dynamic geometry and mathematics.
The frequency signature is the title of my book. It's origin of
Okay.
biological negentropy. The frequency signature is Planck, length and time, times integer exponential golden ratio. It is absolutely the frequency key to Stargates. It's the frequency key to Therify.net, already triggering lucid dreaming measurably. If you increase the flux density and the phase conjugate more broad spectral, that's what a Stargate is. Elena suggested that we insert these visuals for the wonderful conversation on advanced propulsion with extraterrestrial craft, warp versus impulse power. So these are some of the visuals. This is the section. The visuals are available at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. And so just to go through these. So this is the sense, and we're talking about when two pine cones kissing noses to create gravity. This is the actual implosion effect called phase conjugation, when the vortex implode by perfect alignment from opposing directions. For example, in phase conjugate optics, this is called four-wave mixing. Bottom right, you see how the lasers actually leave that trail. And that makes the implosive compression, we now know, tuned to Planck at the center, which causes negentropy and is the way out through the speed of light, through the Planck threshold, into the longitudinal wave called vril, or literally gravity waves. Top left visual is how the hex view of that cube produces the pairs of primary colors, where phase conjugation is also the cause of color. And that concept of the pine cones kissing noses is all over the myth, from the pituitary pineal to the way in which gold powder was served in a pine cone. But the main physics is right here, that when the waves add and multiply using golden ratio recursively, you can add any two and get the next number. 1.618 squared is 2.618, for example. So you can multiply times golden ratio to the next one, or you can add any two numbers and get the next one. That is not only the solution to adding and multiplying, but it is the solution to recursive constructive wave interference called heterodyning, and therefore it is the solution to compression. And the solution to compression is the solution to everything. Even Einstein agreed with that one. So this is just a visual view, and many of you have seen our animations of Holy Grail based on this. So we'll see here now that that top-down view of the 10 spirals of the golden mean, well known to be the top-down view of every living protein, DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac, and the way gravity masses are arranged in the universe, the dodeca. But here is the published proof. This is quite literally the top-down view of hydrogen. And the way here is proven how hydrogen is fractal, because the three hydrogen radii are precisely golden ratio multiples of Planck, the musical key of the universe. And these are the published papers, and we'll give the links here. So this is the smoking gun, that hydrogen is assembled like a pine cone fractal, and that recursive adding and multiplying of the wavefronts using golden ratio in hydrogen itself is how hydrogen makes gravity, because for the first time, thanks to my new equation predicting the radii of hydrogen, we have proof of how hydrogen is fractal. Reminder, many physicists already believe fractality causes gravity, but here we're answering the question of how fractality causes gravity, because golden ratio is fractality perfected. So taking that equation I named origin of biologic negentropy, most of you have heard this before, multiplying by integer exponential golden ratio, we get 3 hydrogen radii, ADP, ADP, the exact two only wavelength that cause photosynthesis, the British foot, the definition of sacred dimension, Schumann harmonics, brainwave harmonics for bliss, the LF Mayer wave, the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year, suggesting strongly that this is the path out of chaos, named Origin of Biologic Negentropy, the title of my book. And here you see the first paper we published. Here, this is, there's the link in the General Science Journal for publications with mathematician Martin Jones and my partner William Donovan, that we took generalized wave equations to prove that golden mean ratio is the general solution to constructive wave interference, and by direct implication, the general solution to compression. So in the next paper, you'll see we take that, once we've proved that Klein-Gordon generalized wave equations proved the solution to constructive wave interference, and therefore the solution to constructive compression, the next paper, which is on the right here, extends that to show then that fractal golden ratio phase conjugation is in fact the cause of geometry. I'm sorry, the cause of gravity, because even as Einstein said, infinite non-destructive compression is obviously the solution, But of course, no one told them what a fractal was. And physics has already known that infinite compression mathematically is the problem fractality solves. But this is the first strong published evidence of how a fractal electric field is formed. First of all, we use hydrogen as an example, but later you'll see that this applies to the whole atomic table. Now, in this conversation with Elena Danaan, we talk repeatedly about Tom Bearden's proofs that longitudinal interferometry, sometimes called vril or torsional, is in fact the substance, what gravity waves are made of. So if you want the paper, the link here to his work and book, Gravitobiology, all of the links are at also the bottom, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. So we're not going to go into this in detail, but so Einstein had some confusions about thinking the speed of light was the speed limit, when in fact golden ratio is the way through the speed of light, as Raymond Chow suggested. And so the fact that the measurements faster than light dominate around golden ratio 1.62 times c light speed is another second smoking gun that we've identified the cause of gravity. Note here, when the transverse wave enters that vortex on the left, what exits on the right, tuned by Planck, the tip of that squirt gun, is the longitudinal or compressional wave. And that's what goes, as it were, into that array, the gravity field array, the dodecahedron Earth grid. And we go into this elsewhere about Tesla's mistakes, just that if he had used the right phase conjugate frequency signature tuned to Planck, and if he had known that the longitudinal interferometry is the only way to, sorry, just 1 second here. It's the only way to distribute that longitudinal wave into this fractal dodecahedron. So to achieve energy distribution without wires, we need this. And here it is. This is the evidence that the geometry of the universe is dodeca, or fractal, is in Nature magazine. And as a New Scientist says, the geometry of the universe is fractal. We see now that they're both right. So this is the vortex that made gravity originally from Schauberger, that the piezo-charged water implodes through the speed of light here. And not only is there a voltage difference in that piezo water vortex, but it is a gravity maker. So the reason the US lost to the Nazis was because they did not know how a vortex makes gravity. That's what we're about here. And Schauberger knew the reason that he had to piezoelectrically dope that vortex. These are examples of a zero-point vacuum energy devices, basically capacitive implosion, the concentric tubes of the Joe cell here. And this is on the left, the picture of Keshe making gravity with rotating phase conjugators. If you can make the phase conjugators, for example, carbon nano, 99% pure, which he cannot, then this can be accomplished efficiently. That's what's called a rotating conjugator making gravity. And here we're getting to the idea of the double vortex in Elena Danaan's pictures. This is just more pictures. This is Searle using a high DC voltage by the rotating magnets, which are four-wave mixing phase conjugate magnetics, and then they apply that high DC voltage to the curved concave shell, making the electrostatic electrogravitics we discuss in the conversation coming up here. This is the De Palma zero-point energy device, which also is implosive. And this is the same 12 magnets rotating, making the gravity that allowed Leet Skalman to build Coral Castle. And this is more pictures of the Vimana Hanabu Nazi Bell. And this is, again, fitting perfectly with Elena's picture of the Vimana Nazi Bell and how all these, this is actually two concentric cylinders rotating in this case, the red mercury into a vortex. And as the conic angle of that vortex becomes implosive, and if the mercury is doped with an iron powder, making it red for high magnetic flux density as well, you can optimize the production of gravity. And this is
choosing compassion carefully aligns the magnetic field donuts around the heart so that nest dodeca icasa perfect embedding, self not self, squirting pineal pine cone through the speed of light into time intent creates the future, and revolving that spin
this is
path
the whole
to 0 point in the blood, we get the Holy Grail, which has no inside or outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains, self-embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, into that 3D fractal you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing, heart within heart, perfectly self-contained, self-embedded compassion.
So I just sent you my Valentine. And if you rotate that, you see the grail of that implosion is, in fact, literally what's happening, not just in the hydrogen bond in the center of DNA, but in the hydrogen bond that implodes to make gravity. Here is golden ratio in the Mandelbrot fractal. Here's an animation of how that's a flame inside a flame. That's the embeddability. And that's all golden ratio, that infinite stellation, related to the Star Mother model. And here, then, if you take those 10 spirals of the golden mean from the top and then the side view, notice the angle at which those 5 color cubes in the center rotate to embed in the pentadodeca is 32 degrees. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So this is this curvature that, here so you can see better the 5 cubes, in this case 5 tetra, which embed in the cube. So here's 5 tetra making pentodeca, and here's the cube in the pentodeca. So this is, again, from the papers, and this PowerPoint all is at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, how fractality causes gravity. It discusses the precedent, how many other physicists like L. Nashi have modeled golden ratio in gravity modeling. And these are more visuals. You see here, as these waves converge in the top-down view of hydrogen, they add and multiply recursively by golden ratio, the wavelength, and phase velocity, as the phase velocity or wave front speeds adds and multiplies recursively constructively, only golden ratio permitting. That is how the charge wave accelerates towards center when in golden ratio fractal geometry. And that charge acceleration towards center is named the gravity. So this is the precedent work, which I then built upon from beautiful Hayrovska, showing golden ratio all over the hydrogen radii. These are his publications of golden ratio between shells of hydrogen. And so I extended that work, beautiful work by Hayrovska, to discover that, in fact, if you take the distance to center to Planck, golden ratio exponents of Planck, you got those exact radii. So that's how we started that idea. Again, adding and multiplying of wave fronts, producing acceleration of charge towards center, named the gravity. We have lots of pictures, so the attraction due to gravity, et cetera, et cetera. And so we want to make the point here as we're going that not only then have we proved how hydrogen makes gravity, but by extension, so this is what we want to discuss. This is the Star Mother kit without the tetracube inside, but this is Kepler's model of what stabilizes orbital mechanics, literally the gravity of the solar system, which was nest of platonic solids, which obviously has to be golden ratio. But if we look further at how that creates and stabilizes gravity, this is the Anu here, 7 spins, 5 spins. We don't have time for all these slides, but here, this is proof that the same platonic tetracube inside, dodecaecosa outside, is literally the atomic table. Now remember, you cannot put a tetracube inside a dodecaecosa without golden ratio. So first, chemist moon proving tetracube octaecosa is the symmetry of the hadrons of the nucleus. In other words, the nuclear hadrons, protons, electrons, protons, and neutrons, are a platonic nest proven to absolutely has to be golden ratio. So the nucleus is doing golden ratio charge collapse, hint how gravity is made in the nucleus. And then, if you look at the electron shells, they're all SPDF geometry. The s orbital is a torus and 2 teardrops, basically. But the pi suborbital, everybody knows, is tetracube. And the d and f suborbital are dodecaecosa, 5-10 vortex pair, 10-14 electrons, dodecaecosa. So this same exact platonic nest of the nucleus is literally the platonic nest your chemistry teacher should have told you is how the atomic table is built. And if that electron shell nest is a platonic nests have to be golden ratio. So hint, the reason the atomic table makes gravity is it's a perfect platonic nest built by golden ratio. And therefore, it isn't just hydrogen that's built with golden ratio. We have too many pictures. This is the last picture in this series. Here is our actual precedent to published proof. When we saw the generalized wave equations, golden ratio produced max destructive interference, we did a digital synthesis, and on the top is the ratio of waves. If we take a series of waves in the ratio, for example, golden ratio at center, you get max destructive interference. If you take that same series of waves, and this is just a digital synthesis, a digital construction, a model. And at the bottom, the octave wave ratio creates max destructive interference. So there's multiple proofs that you can model the solution to constructive interference, both statistically and with generalized wave equations, and prove that Golden ratio solves constructive interference and therefore constructive compression. So now, back to the film.
That's okay. Chris, what do you say?
Yes, so we have started by the most complex part, in fact.
No, it's fine. Oh, I'm enjoying that.
So I did go fast.
Because, I think it's interesting too to talk about the first method of propulsion. In your book, you cite the anti-gravity torsion field and electrogravity propulsion. And
yes.
So it is what Tesla had discovered at the end of the 19th century. And so this part may be explained simply, in fact, or according to my findings based on Tesla physics. There are some simple approach when only based on ether pressure that can be explained. So this is what I have found on my side, is that for this mode of propulsion, my understanding is that the UFO has to cancel its weight. Okay, so its weight is the mass times gravity. This is what we learn at school. Weight equals mass times gravity. And so for that type of propulsion, the point is how the UFO just cancels or has a force that opposes this weight. And there are in fact three ways to cancel this weight. Either you generate a propulsion force that will be upstairs and that will compensate this the weight, and so this force is created with what Tesla had discovered with electrogravitics. So very high frequency and very high potential. So we discovered the equation in the theory of electromagnetism. So this what was Tesla was doing with these Tesla coils. Well, when Tesla was playing, I would say, with Tesla coils, he was trying to analyze how to create this force, this unknown force he had discovered, which was electrogravity. So the very first thing a UFO can do is to create a push thanks to this electrogravity. And it is what you say in your book when you say that it is the ship, the skirt of the ship is divided in segments. So
yes.
Thanks to this division in segments, the propulsion can be directed in some sectors. So the UFO chooses in which direction it goes. But before that, there is in fact two very important points. So I said that the first possibility is to have that force upstairs, but a UFO is also capable to cancel its mass and to cancel local gravity. So how can it be done? So it is what I've discovered with, in fact, standard physics. So as I said, and as Dan said, the gravity is a variation, what we call a gradient of pressure.
Yeah, electric pressure.
The pressure of the vacuum. There is a pressure in the vacuum. So this is the energy density of the vacuum, because pressure and energy density is the same thing. So there is a pressure in the vacuum, and it's like weather forecast. When you have high pressure, low pressure, between the two, you have wind. And so the gravity is a wind of ether.
Well, in fact, Tesla's name for voltage was actually tension or pressure. It fits perfectly. But I didn't mean to interrupt, but just briefly, I knew Paul La Violette for many years, who wrote his book Electrogravitics about another person I knew, Townsend Brown. And, you know, Townsend Brown was using baked egg whites to make gravity. And he was using a high voltage bias. Actually, the similar way Searle takes a very high voltage bias, applies it to the curved skin differentially, producing that propulsion, which is electrogravitics classically. And the argument in conventional physics is whether that same propulsion for electrostatic propulsion can exist in a vacuum. And your insistence that the vacuum is not empty beautifully solves that problem. That's clear. But the little piece of that puzzle that I think makes it a bit more fun is, why did Townsend Brown use baked egg whites? Actually,
yes, that was next question, actually.
It's called dielectric constant, that the efficiency of charge distribution between the plates of a capacitor, named the insulator between the plates of a capacitor, is named dielectric constant, which means how efficiently that capacitor can resonate, but also means how implosive that capacitance can be, which means implode towards center. Most specifically, this will later get us to a discussion, if we get there this evening, I don't know, about how warp propulsion, but how warp propulsion works, which is remember, we've explained impulse power very well for Star Trek. We haven't done warp power yet. But when Scotty says, you know, light up those niobium crystals, the correct term actually is lithium niobate. And lithium niobate is what's called a phase conjugate dielectric, or a super high dielectric. Now, which is how the warp propulsion worked in Stargate. Now, the super high dielectric constant of lithium niobate is an introduction to how warp propulsion works, which is when you can create enough centripetal force that you can actually carry your own inertial field with you, which Chris was nicely just referring to, why you can make a right turn at 1,000 miles an hour, because you carry your own inertial field with you after you reach a certain critical mass of plasma density. And the way that's done in the warp propulsion engine is, and you can read the whole book on this, the example is called Koski-Frost, and you have the equations for impulse versus warp power, and this example all at fractalfield.com/propulsion. And the book there is called Crystal Propulsion. And basically, the Koski-Frost was another one of these piezoelectric crystals, which is similar to lithium niobate, called niobium crystal in Star Trek Warp. And you put a phase conjugate RF pump wave into that crystal, and the z-axis of that crystal is helical, and that's called a rotating conjugator. And when that imploding conjugator rotates and spins, for example, visualize Buckminster fullerene, which is exactly this shape in carbon, and rotating conjugators make gravity. Example, Keshe has not quite pure enough nanomaterials inside a ping pong ball. The ping pong balls are spinning, and that's making his car float. So actually, the key to warp power, even carrying your own inertial field with you, is the super high dielectric material, example, lithium niobate, niobium crystals, and a rotating conjugator. And admittedly, now that's a very advanced subject, but I just suggested we would get there. And Chris, sorry, I think I interrupted you, but just when you add the concept of super high dielectric materials to the electrogravitics, you come to that breakthrough. That's for what it's worth.
Okay, so,
yes.
So what I wanted to say is that the UFO first, as the first solution to create a force, upward force, thanks to electrogravitics, to compensate its weight. But it has also another possibility. Well, it is a combination of the three. Another possibility is to cancel gravity, local gravity. So, as we said, that gravity is an acceleration of local vacuum energy. So, what Tesla found too is that he said, so it is the most important quote, I think, for me, the most important quote from Tesla is that he said, there is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment. Right. So Tesla said that at his 81st anniversary in 1937. So there is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment. That means that, so when I read that the first time, I do, wow, what does he say? Is it saying that, is it the opposite of E equal mc squared? Because when, according to Tesla, to Einstein, E equal mc squared, so energy is in matter, and vacuum is empty. So energy is in matter. And Tesla says, there is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment. So we could understand that it is the opposite of what Einstein is saying. Okay.
Yeah.
But so whatever I have found on my website, there was a demonstration that starting from the energy of the vacuum, so the energy density, I demonstrate E equal mc squared in only one line. So the demonstration that E equal mc squared stands only on one line when we start from the energy of vacuum. And so it confirms what Tesla said. And in fact, the understanding is that the matter is made by the ether. Matter is, in fact, we would say solidified ether, but it is not really solidified. It's a vibration at the vortex, as Dan explained. So it's the convergence of the vortex that appears to be matter, but in fact, it's the ether that converge, and at the end, it's matter. And so gravity, if we take a planet or Earth, for instance, all the ether flow that will build matter is constantly converging downwards to the Earth to create that matter. And so this creates a depression. So the ether is really sucked by the matter permanently. So I don't have explanation where then this ether goes, because it disappears or goes in another dimension.
But no, see, that's exactly where the longitudinal interferometry solves the issue. I agree completely with what you just said. I would slightly tweak the language. Where you describe ether, I would describe it as a medium of compressible charge behaving as a superfluid, named the ether, plus and minus, charge being simply compression, rarefaction. So then that charge compressed, when the charge rotates, the inertia created is defined, the only definition of mass, and the period of that rotation is the only definition and creator of time. But what my language, following on Tom Bearden, proving what longitudinal waves are gravity waves, is answering the problem you just stated and that Einstein just stated, was where does the charge go when it gets to the center? Now we know where the drain hole is. It's infinite non-destructive compression of charge, because as the charge uses Goldwyn ratio times Planck and reaches the tip, actually the needle of the pine cone's nose, which is the Planck dimension, at that threshold, specifically and only, that transverse EMF is compressed into compressional EMF, named gravity waves, according to Bearden's equations. And that's where the charge goes out the center, because it travels through the speed of light at that point, measurably at Goldwyn ratio multiples times the speed of light per Raymond Chow's measurements, which is the smoking gun proof of the longitudinal interferometry theory of gravity. So beautifully, you've led up to exactly what needed to be explained, was where did the charge go when it got out the center? Where did the ether go? We all agree that ether compressed is mass. But what we now just learned is how infinite non-destructive compression of charge, Einstein's name for gravity, is possible, because there's a way out through center, a longitudinal wave.
So, yes, Elena? Yeah.
I have a question. It goes infinitely in this, can you call it a singularity?
Yes, well, the Planck is the thing. Planck is the singularity. Yes, absolutely.
It's a singularity. So, yes. And then it goes somewhere.
When Jodie Foster needed a dodecahedron to have the lucid dream through that Stargate, because the nodes of that longitudinal compressional wave can exchange inertia. In other words, you could make ancestor phone calls which is what Jodie Foster did in the movie Contact, you could make ancestor phone calls only at the cross-point compressional nodes, Dodecki, Kosa, Earth grid, when my friend Professor Korotkov followed the Kogi to where they made phone calls to ancestors and measured the quality of air that enabled ancestor phone calls, defining sacred space. And we teach 3 ways, we sell 3 ways to measure that: goldenmean.info/architecture, flameinmind.com/lifeforce. The sacred space that enabled ancestor phone calls, the same place that Kozyrev had to put the Kozyrev mirrors to make telepathy work, these magnetic line cross points, that's called inhabiting the array. That's how the 9 work, for example. That's why,
Oh, yes.
that's why you can't make ancestor phone calls inside an aluminum building. No way. The array doesn't propagate that because the dielectric constant of that aluminum is the opposite. That's why guns will melt during the rapture, because it generates heat. So where it goes is that array, and that is the physics of Hey Ave, heaven, or Plains of Sharon, or Champs-Élysées. That is the fractal array of perfectly distributed charge, literally song lines, dreaming tracks.
Chris, what you have to say about that?
So, so effectively, so we agree that gravity or the energy stream, it goes downwards the Earth, and so to cancel gravity, a UFO has to be in a bubble, so a vortex bubble, to isolate itself from this downward stream. So the goal of the vortex that is created with the red mercury is to shield the UFO in that bubble of ether that isolates it from the stream that goes downwards. You understand? So
Yes.
This is the goal of that. This is the goal of this vortex, and the side effect is that it creates a huge magnetic field, because the magnetism is not clearly understood by science today, because even mainly when you say the vacuum is empty, you cannot understand what is magnetism. When you know that the vacuum is full, in fact, of ether or frill, and that magnetism is a vortex of ether, so the UFO does not want to create a magnetic field. The UFO wants to isolate itself from the downward stream, and for that, it creates a vortex around it. And the magnetic field is a side effect of this vortex, okay? And with this vortex, locally, gravity G equals 0. There is no more gravity, so the UFO floats inside that bubble of ether. Okay, so this is the goal of this vortex.
Well, I think,
yes,
that led beautifully before you led to the idea of phase conjugate dielectrics. What you just said leads beautifully to the concept of phase conjugate magnetics, which Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the world's most famous physicists, suggested I had invented. Let me explain that when magnetic lines converge in a geometry, what's called conjugation, visualize fractal rows, magnetic lines can implode just like capacitive lines. The difference between electricity and magnetism is simply a right angle, actually. It's all the same fluid. If the voltage lines are here, the magnetic lines are here. It's perpendicular components of the same inertia. But the example, and I give you a simple example, when Elizabeth Rauscher measured the frequency harmonics that eliminated pain in FDA trials, then I wrote an equation to explain what those frequencies were. It's Planck times Golden ratio. So the magnetic lines actually can implode. And so we took a Tesla coil and dumped 500,000 volts into this plasma, which is the light bulb on the pyramid carvings. It's therify.net. And we make a super strong phase conjugate magnetic field, which is proven in FDA trials. There's a whole article at therify.net, to eliminate pain, because obviously centripetal squeezing is the opposite of pain by definition. Pain is fractality, that's bleeding charge, because the fractal is broken. You restore centripetal force, you eliminate pain. We're very good at that at therify.net. Point is, that's a beautiful introduction to phase conjugate magnetics, how magnetism can implode, exactly analogous to how charge or capacitance can implode. Phase conjugate dielectrics, phase conjugate magnetics. So the point is that when that goes to critical inertial escape velocity, then I think you're exactly right. That's when you carry your inertial field with you, what you say, you're insulating from the ether, and therefore you can make a right turn at 1,000 miles an hour, and the people inside feel nothing.
Yes, exactly. And the beauty of that is that not only the UFO cancels gravity, so this would be sufficient to cancel the weight. If you remember the formula, weight equals mass times gravity. If you cancel gravity, okay, there is no more weight. But the beauty of that is that the UFO also cancels its mass. And there we need to understand what is mass.
Yes.
Okay, because what we see, the UFO is able to accelerate as if it had effectively no inertia. Okay, so no inertia means mass equals 0. Okay, so how can it be possible? So here you need to understand, in fact, quantum physics and what is called the boson de Higgs. So maybe you have heard about the boson de Higgs. Okay, so what's the and it's also quite recent for me, this in the understanding, because I think it's like everybody, you just hear about the boson de Higgs, but you don't know what it is. But in fact, it's very simple. What is the science? The physicists have discovered in 1964, in fact, so by Peter Higgs and two others, is that they assume, or they took the hypothesis that particles, in fact, have no mass, or have a mass which is null. And that mass, so mass is not an intrinsic property of the particle, but it is an extrinsic characteristic of the particle because of its interaction with the vacuum. So here, the physicists in 1964, the quantum physics admitted that vacuum is empty, okay, like Einstein hypothesis for general relativity. But in 1964, they say, okay, no, vacuum is not empty, and the mass is the resistance. Mass is only the resistance when the particle accelerates in the vacuum. Okay.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so what they call, what the quantum physicists call boson de Higgs, but it's ether, it's frill, it's the same thing. Boson de Higgs, the boson de Higgs is the ether, and they say, okay, mass is just the resistance to move in that superfluid. That's it. And what I found recently, it is a very well-known result in fluid mechanics. Everybody who study fluid mechanics sees that it is part of fluid mechanics that in a superfluid, if a particle moves in a superfluid at a constant speed, there is no force. So exactly, yes, there is no force. And only if the particle accelerates or brakes or slow down, there is a force, which is the inertia force. And it is there that the inertial mass appears. It is the resistance of the particle to change its speed in the ether. That's it. So, and so why do we have a mass? And it is also the equivalence principle that is used in general relativity that has been hypothesized by Einstein to say, okay, the weighing mass and the inertial mass is the same, but Einstein is totally unable to explain why. It is the basics of general relativity, this equivalence principle, and to say, okay, an acceleration and gravitation is the same thing. So all general relativity has been studied and designed thanks to this equivalence principle, which is not explained by standard physics. And this principle is quite obvious. It is because it is the resistance of any movement in ether. And when you are at rest on Earth and you are in that gravity field, in fact, this ether stream that goes downwards and enters the Earth and this ether stream is accelerated. So it is accelerated at 1g, and so this is your weighing mass, okay? Because your body, your particles, crosses this ether stream that is accelerated downwards. And at the opposite, when you are in a spaceship, in space, and the spaceship accelerates at 1g, you have an inertial mass, because here again, you cross the ether, because it is you that accelerates in the ether. So this is the meaning of mass. And the boson de Higgs is just so the interaction of a particle with the environment. That's it. Okay. So now, if just let me finish. Now, if the UFO is able to isolate itself in that bubble.
That's it.
Okay. So in that bubble, so there is no more gravity that goes downward because of the ether stream passes at the outside of the UFO, and so gravity is equal 0, but also mass equals 0 because there is no more it is no more crossed by this ether stream. So mass equals 0. You see the beauty of that, and this is the principle of cancellation of mass.
I think really that's a beautiful language. I think we could tweak it maybe just slightly to even make it more convincing, but it's a beautiful. So the key is the decoupling from the ether stream. We're in total agreement with that. That's beautiful.
I have a question. So see, if I understand it well, the core engine of the ship produces an electromagnetic shield around the ship, and this shield creates a medium of void. It's void. There's no particles, nothing else, and the ship so loses its mass. It has no mass because there's no friction, so it can move so super fast as if it had no mass. Is that? See, I understand it well?
I think we need to be more specific. The only definition of mass is the inertia stored when charge rotates. And that inertia is both inertial mass and physical mass. And we're in total agreement that gravity is only defined by acceleration of that inertia. But the key here is when the plasma field of that ship reaches critical inertial density in the plasma donut, that decouples the internal inertia from the external inertia of what Chris correctly called the ether stream. And that moment of decoupling is when the plasma donut has critical inertial density that you, quote, carry your own inertial field with you. It doesn't mean that you lose inertia. You do not lose mass. You simply have isolated the internal charge rotation from the external charge rotation, the ether stream, as Chris said. And the key to understanding that difference is to understand clearly that mass is only and never has been anything more than a name for the inertia created when charge rotates. And so when you take that inertial field with you is when that plasma field reaches critical density, and then you have you carry your own inertial field with you. Then you can make a right turn at 1,000 miles an hour because you've decoupled from the external inertial field. You know, we use the term Higgs boson a lot also, but I don't think actually the Higgs boson concept is necessary to describe that decoupling actually. Well, anyway, but that's not the point. The point is to understand that mass only names the inertia stored by charge rotating, and you can decouple from it when your own plasma field is dense enough.
Chris, what do you think about? Would you have something to add or?
So on this point, I don't know
Yeah. Okay.
if
Yeah. Everything is said. Yeah.
It's yes.
Because I have a question. Because
yes.
Yeah. No. Go on, please.
So just to conclude, in fact, so just to conclude for the on the chapter of anti-gravity torsion field and electrogravitic propulsion. So for I would say a standard displacement in this space-time, so without using portals and so on. So the UFO combines these three effects. So electrogravitic propulsion, mass cancellation, and gravity cancellation.
And we should point out that we're using the term torsion field and longitudinal field and Vril field, and these are pretty much interchangeable. After you see Bearden's equations proving that longitudinal waves are gravity waves, at the bottom of fractalfield.com says vacuum energy, suddenly all these languages converge into a very understandable concept. The moment when you produce the longitudinal field, you're producing propulsion because you've accelerated the charge into a compressional array. Remember, when the transverse electromagnetic field converges at center, it doesn't create symmetric squeezing, no implosion, no phase conjugation, no gravity. But when the compressional component of the electromagnetic wave, called longitudinal, converges symmetrically from opposite sides, for example, phase conjugate optics, first time reversal and negentropy was measured, that perfect opposing compressional squeezes is the implosion that defined the first nuclear device and defines the production of the longitudinal projection, literally the Jedi. That's the Jedi, the plasma projector.
Thank you. So I have something to mention that I've been told by upstairs. So there's this core engine with frill of plasma. Okay, the cone that concentrates the energy and the power and powers the rest. I don't know how it is connected. And then all around, it can be under the habitacle. Here it's the habitacle is in it, but usually it's under it, or you have even sometimes different balls of it. The coils, these things, the toroids, okay? Sorry, not the coils, sorry, the toroid. So I've been told that these are, that's a section. The toroid is, there are two toroids, in fact, one in each other. And in between, it's filled with rare metals, and I've been told mercury, and Chris told me about red mercury. So because of the I think the magnets are linked to the speed. I don't know, you said it's done, it's to contain it. Yeah, and so it turns, in one sense, in one direction, horizontal, and the other donuts inside turns up, you know, like the coils.
Yeah.
So they are perpendicular directions in, and that creates anti-gravity. What can you comment on that?
Well, when the original classic drawings of the Hanabu, for example, you had two concentric cylinders rotating in opposite directions, just as in your drawing, and between them was the toroidal double vortex spinning of the red iron powder doped mercury. The iron powder enables the magnetic flux density. The mercury has the critical inertial mass. And then if you had two of them perpendicular, you could, by controlling those two, you control the vector directions. So obviously two toroids would make sense. And it's true that the magnets around would contain the plasma density at the cross point at center. So actually that drawing makes sense. I would speculate that that's not one of the more advanced propulsion designs, that's one of the original ones actually.
Chris, yeah.
Yes, so my understanding of your drawing, Elena, so the magnets around the column, or no, the other drawing, zoom in. with the magnets around the column and then the toroid. So for me, the magnets around the column are the starter of the system. And then what you have to know is that this tokamak, you have these two tokamaks that are so one into each other, because it is what we call a dynamo. A dynamo, it means that the first toroid drives, or the movement of Mercury in the first toroid generates, because it's plasma, so it generates electromagnetic field. This electromagnetic field drives the plasma in the second toroid, okay? And then the second toroid generates electromagnetic lines, and these electromagnetic lines drives the plasma in the first toroid. So it means that it's a dynamo, so it is a self-driven. You understand? And so
Yes.
for me, the magnets around the column are just a starter. And then once the system is started, so the first toroid drives the second toroid that drives the first toroid. So you have that dynamo, and so so you have this. So this is because what I found is that in plasma physics, the plasma in fact follows the electromagnetic lines, follows the magnetic lines. So and because the magnetic lines are perpendicular to the movement of the plasma, it means that the second toroid it follows the electromagnetic lines of the first toroid, and vice versa. And so it is self-driven.
I really like that. I would just add briefly that in convergence of perfect perpendiculars is pretty much a definition of phase conjugation. So that's what allows the implosion, is that perfect perpendicular. For example, the lasers have to converge in, it's called four-wave mixing. So phase conjugation, which is the first way that negentropy was discovered, is defined by perfect perpendiculars for the sacred four directions, for example. So if you want to implode, you need perfect perpendiculars.
So, and I have a video on that about what we call the, yes, it was my video number 3, about some experiments that were made by Russian, I think, and others, what is called MHD dynamo, magneto-hydrodynamics dynamo. So the goal of these experiments were to have this self-driven plasma rotating permanently. So so for me, it is a MHD dynamo.
Magnetohydrodynamic, very good. But I wonder, Elena, that picture you have clearly relates to what I would call impulse power, you know, the plasma vortex. I wonder if they gave you any drawings of what later was called warp propulsion, which I see as a fire crystal toy stone, this lithium niobium.
They didn't. He didn't give me a visual, but he explained to me what he calls hyperdrive or warp. It's
yeah.
very short. I can. So hyperdrive, that's in the propulsion system, of course. It consists in projecting a beam of energy ahead of the craft, which is pulled into it rather than propelled. A rotating double plasma helix is projected ahead in a very short frequency, creating a distortion in the ship's gravitational field. It has for effect that the ship is sucked ahead. It works on creating a gravity wave displacement, no idea what it is, projecting it to any distance ahead, with, of course, the ability to adjust the velocity. So what do you do with that?
Well, yeah, I think, if you read the book on the Koski-Frost crystal, which generated 800 times its own weight in gravity, you got an RF pump wave and a highly phase conjugate dielectric crystal. And so that it's conjugating and rotating at the same time. And that could be a a way to understand how that's projecting that gravity field, literally massive suction ahead of the ship. I suspect there's multiple ways to do that kind of implosion. And this kind of magnetohydrodynamic, the vortex shown, is a good introduction to rotating conjugators. Very simply, if you rotate fullerenes of sufficient purity, and our carbon nano team is up to that. The point is that once you understand what a rotating conjugator is, visualize the clathrate cage of magic water or Buckminster fullerene of carbon. The conjugator is this shape, and if you rotate it, it implodes, and you can direct that field of implosion and literally be sucked in, as it were, sucking the ship toward its destination.
Elena, on my side, my understanding of the hyperdrive or warp drive, so it's my feeling, in fact, is that with electrogravitics, so there is a change of pressure that is created at around the shell of the UFO. But maybe I don't know the range of this change of pressure, and so my understanding is that the electrogravitic propulsion may reach a certain maximum speed, and if you want to go faster, maybe you have to change the pressure. Ether pressure above the craft on a much more larger distance to allow faster speed. So this is my understanding. So this could be the reason why you need to project that beam far away to reach larger speeds. And there is a very interesting book. This is this one. This one, I don't know. It has yes, it is reverted maybe the image. Anti-gravity propulsion dynamics. This is a story. This is coming from the UFO of the Andreasson affair. So the Andreasson affair is a very well-known affair of a woman, Betty Andreasson. Her name is Betty Andreasson, who were abducted in the 67 and plenty of times. And she then, with Robert Fuller, had some hypnosis and so on, regressive hypnosis, and gave many drawings of the UFO and how it works and so on. And you have some big crystal spheres inside. And then Paul Potter, so the author of that book, studied that UFO. And so it's very, very complex. It's really the most difficult book I've read about UFO. This is this one, but really very, very difficult. And the physics that is there is really very, very high level electromagnetism. But so the propulsion looks very much like what you say with the hyperdrive and the double helix. Even in Paul Potter book, there is only one single helix. Maybe I'm drawing somewhere. So I don't know if you see this, but it looks yes, a lot like what you are saying with the projection of a beam toward upstairs.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting that the z-axis of the high, like lithium niobate or Minkowski frost, is a double helix, actually. And you pump that with a phase conjugate or a pump wave. So the metaphors do kind of fit together. And I agree that this gets pretty esoteric. I just like to make one little quick, almost closing comment, if I may. And I would suggest there may be a very interesting clue to what is the speed limit of this kind of propulsion called warp. Yeah. I would say longitudinal, superluminal. Here's a hint or a clue. Our friend Billy Myers, when he was being lifted up into the craft of the Pleiadians in his reports, he said, you know, they would beam me up, Scotty. He said that one day he was upset, he was angry, and they couldn't beam him up in the normal way. hint, longitudinal interferometry. Now, we know, for example, that if you're angry at the moment of death, you can't do the compression well that's required for successful death, because anger is destructive wave interference 1/7, long story. So the ability to be compressed non-destructively has an emotional component, which is determining what part of you can be efficiently accelerated. Remember when Randy Kramer was saying, well, you know, the first time you go through the Stargates, you become a bit disoriented, and then you learn how to maintain your serenity. So the emotional relationship to this kind of acceleration may be a very deep clue.
That's why most of the abductions occur when the subject is sleeping.
Yeah, they have to keep them peaceful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't take that emotional field with you, because you can't be compressed, therefore accelerated. And non-destructive compression is the key to everything.
Interesting. So the lithium niobate crystals you mentioned, I was told that the frill, the energy plasmic, you know, can be stored, what is most commonly stored in crystals. And in this cylinder I've seen in the center, one day I've been shown they opened a little door, and I could pick a vision on this cylinder, and there were in the, I think the first third of the cylinder, I could see translucent crystals. And I've been explained that's what maintains it in the cylinder and what stores it. It's necessary to have these crystals, otherwise it's totally unstable. So I was
well, there's so many names.
That.
We have the Silmarion, we have the fire crystal, the toy stone, the gear cube, many names for fire crystal. But I think the Lewis Acker studies we were involved were pretty compelling, that basically a crystal which can store a longitudinal wave because of a rotating conjugator. Again, I recommend the Koski-Frost book called Glimpses of Epiphany in Crystal Propulsion at fractalfield.com/propulsion. Basically, what a fire crystal is this, quartz is hexagonal because it's a ratcheting helix casting a shadow. It's a double helix, literally. Now, lithium niobate is a super high dielectric version thereof. Then you take this RF conjugate pump wave, which is how the Koski-Frost crystal changes, made 800 times its own weight and gravity, and changed volume. This is literally a fire crystal. And I think that's what Scotty called the dilithium crystals. Lithium niobate is a very good example of a super high phase conjugate dielectric, enabling the storage of the longitudinal waves called vril.
Thank you. Perfect. Before moving on, because I know time runs and it's a lot of information for the people who are listening to this. Chris, you told me the first time we connected, we write to each other. I contacted you because you mentioned this, because I mentioned mercury that goes into these toroids. You mentioned that on some UFO crashes, there was leaking red mercury. You remember? Could you tell me about this, please?
Yes. So first, when I read your book and I saw your drawing, what I discovered is that if we say, okay, it's a mercury plasma, normally mercury is a positive ion, and in the drawing it was rotating like negative ions. So I said, wow, okay. It's surprising. The direction of rotation means that it is a negative mercury ion. So I've searched what kind of ion could be negative mercury, and so what I found, for instance, that so I don't know the name in English, iodure mercury, diiodure mercury is a negative and red. So in your book, I think you said that it was, red mercury, and I found that this type of ion is red. And in the disclosure project, there is a testimony of one guy, a sergeant, and that said that he was a military and came on a crash, on a UFO crash, and discovered that that UFO was leaking. It was more purple, said purple mercury liquid, and so it's also there is another UFO or alien reproduction vehicle that I've used a lot for my studies is a flux liner that was designed by the US or by Lockheed Martin in the 60s. And this testimony, this is a testimony from Mark McCandlish. And this, so it's for sure you know the Disclosure Project, and you were interviewed recently by Dan Willis, who were one of the witness of the Disclosure Project. And so the testimony of Mark McCandlish is very interesting because it shows a very simple UFO, but and this very simple UFO is also using mercury.
I think it's worthy of note. Well, first of all, our team says that the wetting agent that enables the iron powder to be soluble in the mercury is the secret sauce, but they're clear why, because you get magnetic flux density along with the high inertial density of the mercury in the red. So that fits with what you're saying. But I just want to add one little fun thought. So many of the ancient pyramids that use longitudinal interferometry to achieve global wire distribution without power distribution without wires, the ancient pyramids were that purpose because they were on these longitudinal nodes, the Vril nodes, they used mercury. That's why so many of those pyramids had mercury, because that same kind of compression wave in the mercury enabled the propagation of the longitudinal field.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Well, that's a lot of information. I think we should do others like this. What I think there are other methods of propulsion, such as dark energy as well. Maybe that's a mystery to me, dark energy, because it's okay. My experience of
We lost you, Elena.
Yeah,
but I've seen one.
Okay.
I've seen one.
We lost you a few seconds.
Just repeat that. Just repeat what you're. Just repeat.
Oh, okay. Yes, the connection unstable. Okay,
Yeah.
I cut. No, right. So my only experience of dark energy, it's not dark matter, it's dark energy, is stargates and portals. I've never been through myself through a stargate or portal, but I've seen one. I've been shown one, and it's like in the movie Stargate. There is a lack of a liquid
membrane
thing and membrane. And so what Thorhan told me, he said, you call it dark energy. And this material, when you dial the right key, it's made with frequency and mathematics. I don't know exactly what it is. You send it through it, and it will connect. It will catch the formula or the geometric formula of its coordinates that imprints in this kind of liquid stuff, and that connects quantumly, remotely, to a location that, to the coordinates. And if you just enter this liquid, you are just teleported. You're teleported. So I still don't know. It's difficult to understand what is dark energy. What you both would have ideas about that?
I think, remember, we're saying the universe is the ether, as Chris would say, is one single contiguous compressible media calls it ether, I call it charge, compression, rarefaction. So obviously the difference between regular energy and dark energy is simply compression versus rarefaction. It is the inverse wave function, literally, the 0 point. What the 0 point delivers, that perfect compression point, is distribution into that array. That's where you're liquefied. Now, that membrane, remember in the movie Stargate, used the dial was the letters of the Ophanim Enochian. We now know why, because that's a hypercube superset of the tetracubic spirals on the torus of the Hebrew, which actually is simply how you implode and phase conjugate the compression waves of those domains into that perfect focus plane, the membrane, where it can be liquefied. Now, the next important point is, where does that Stargate go to? And the point is that at the point of liquefaction, you're dissolved into the array. Now, it's precisely like the internet and packet switching, actually, in that the receiving point in the array is where there is the greatest resonance and therefore the least resistance, which means the receiving point has to have the exact same complex wave frequency signature, means you emerge from the array at that node because that's the place of least resistance.
Okay, I have actually my drawing of it.
Yes, and in the movie Stargate, it's similar. You have this membrane, and you're liquefied at the membrane. The movie Stargate was, Rick Hass and I knew him, those people.
Yeah.
But the point is, and it's even said that when you die, if you take pure intention with you, then when you're liquefied at that moment of compression, something does emerge. Whereas if you have no pure intention, then when you're liquefied at the moment of raid, that array is the collective unconscious. That's Hey Ave, heaven, perfect charge distribution. So to enter that array, you need perfect compression and a perfectly shareable wave, literally the measure of pure intention. That's why Stargates would necessarily create more confusion unless you're serene at the moment of entry, and not a bad metaphor for what it is to enter successful death.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think?
I'm not absolutely not an expert in on that point, so joker.
Okay, I got it. Yes, Thoran told me that the key, it's like a dial number, and you can change the destination of a Stargate wherever you go. And he made really a very strong difference. He always insists on a difference. He said wormholes can be portals, but portals are not always wormholes. It said a Stargate / portal is a teleportation device, well, or natural or artificial, but a wormhole is different. It's a tunnel, a shortcut throughout the fabric of space-time, and it says to me it's like a black hole, but there's no singularity. It's like a tunnel, and he said you need to have a strong technology and to really withstand the gravity forces and to annihilate them. So I just want to mention that if it resonates with you.
And there's two quick points that could be added to that. One is our sources have said the ETs, when they set up stargates and portals on the Earth, they like to use places of natural compression we call sacred sites because it adds to the natural implosive effect. And the second point is, and I refer to Deep Space Nine now, which is the Nine.
Yes.
The whole point of Deep Space Nine, when they realized that not only was locating next to the Stargate how you make money, because transportation is the key, but the key point of that whole series, which they learned from Puhar versus Schlemmer, was the wormhole has intent. In other words, when you enter that wormhole, your intention will be tested, and where you get steered can have to do with whether the wormhole likes you or not. In other words, these plasma wormholes are part of a vast mind.
Wow. Yeah, consciousness. That's
Deep Space
impressive.
Nine. I mean, that was a theme.
Yeah.
But so the wormhole, and consciousness is that wormhole, basically, on a small scale inside us, and a large scale interstellar.
Well, I think that is a lot of information. I just wanted to I think we can do other continue these conversations. And last thing I wanted to mention to you, in my drawings, you've seen this one. He said that's the most primitive, he said himself, where you have the habitacle in the big toroid. It says the most common is the toroid is under the habitacle. But he showed me also that it is the most common. He showed me also this one where you have little balls, and that made me think about the honeyboo. And the double toroids are these little balls, and you have this like this. Just you see that, the little ball.
I think sometimes
and,
the spheres are the propagating point for electrogravitics, in enabling it to be directional sometimes, I think. And in that case, just a high voltage on the curvature through a high dielectric can create the electrogravitic effect, even without the magnetic torus.
He calls it, by the way, anti-gravity ball, actually.
Yeah, which, you know, if you have a high voltage bias on a curved metal surface, particularly if it's a high dielectric capacitor, you can implode the capacitance, which is longitudinal. So in that case, you wouldn't even necessarily need a Mercury vortex if you had a high voltage source, as in Serval. And if you had 3 balls, then you could make that directional. You could steer, for example. The classic
that makes sense.
undercarriage.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I think we may end our discussion here, and we need to do more because there's other questions I haven't yet ask you, but I think we can do different parts because it's maybe a lot to take for the
yes, it's been a lot.
The listeners. It's been a lot.
We will add pictures, and
yes,
and we want to congratulate Elena for her bravery in being the frontispiece of so much focus on the Federation and all these issues. And I think I'd like to congratulate Chris too for his bravery on confronting physics about the ether, etc. And it's wonderful the way these ideas fit together. So yes, we should have more dialogue and open to more questions. Thank you.
Yes, Dan. Thank you. And yes, Chris is very brave. Chris, yeah.
Oh, and I want to thank you, Elena, for the invitation, and also for all what you do and all the good waves you give to us.
Exactly.
The good vibrations.
Thank you, Elena. You're the pure intention.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And what I find exciting in all of this is that contactees like me, we are working, well, used in a way as soft disclosure. We are, because they cannot give the technology, like the whole thing. It's us to figure it out. So they give elements. For instance, in my book, I've been given some elements, and then these elements are to be shared and people can figure it out themselves. It's like they found out themselves. And that's what we were trying to do. And that's what you both are amazingly doing since years of work as well. So very exciting.
And we can feel it together. Thank you.
Yes, so we all have a part of the puzzle.
Exactly. Blessing.
So Chris and Dan, thank you very much. People will find all the links to their work and their publications below the video. And moving onward and forward.
We will see you again.
Oh yes, that's just the first of many.
More fun to come.
More fun to come.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
I stop recording.